The Korthek had been the kings of their corner of the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Their home planet, Vexstar, was a nightmare world where most creatures would die within minutes. The gravity there could crush bones like twigs. Radiation. Storms swept across the surface every few days, turning anything caught outside into ash. The very air was thick with toxic gases that burned the lungs of weaker species, but the Korthek thrived there. They had thick, armored skin that looked like living metal. Their bodies were built like tanks, with backup organs in case the first ones failed. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and teeth that could tear through steel. To them, pain was just another word for weakness. Their society worshipped strength above everything else. The strongest Korthek became leaders. The smartest became generals. The most ruthless became legends. They had conquered 47 different worlds, and every single time it had been the same story. Show up, demand surrender, and watch the locals either bow down or get wiped out. It was almost boring how easy it had become. Commander Zethrak stood in the command center of their biggest warship, the Bone Render. The ship was massive, built like a floating fortress covered in weapons. Its hull was decorated with the bones of creatures from worlds they had conquered. This wasn't just for show, it was a message. Submit or become decoration. The holographic star map in front of him showed thousands of systems, most already marked with the red symbol of Korthek control. But there was one small section that still glowed blue, unexplored space. His scouts had finally found something interesting there. "Report," Zethrak growled, his voice like grinding stone. A younger Korthek officer approached, keeping his head low in respect. "Sir, we found a system with a habitable planet. Third rock from their star? The locals call it Earth?" Zethrak's mandibles clicked with interest. "What do we know about them?" "They're called humans, sir. They've only been traveling between stars. For a few decades, very primitive technology compared to ours. But sir, the officer hesitated. "Speak." "Their planet is classified as a Class 7 death world in the Galactic database." This made Zethrak laugh, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. A death world meant the planet was dangerous enough to kill most species just by existing there. But Class 7? That was impressive. Only a handful of worlds in the galaxy earned that rating. His own homeworld was Class 8. Interesting, he mused. If these humans survived on such a world, they might actually provide some entertainment before we crush them. The officer pulled up images of Earth on the main screen. It looked almost peaceful from space, blue oceans, white clouds, green and brown continents. But Zethrak knew better than to judge a death world by its appearance. Vexstar looked beautiful from orbit too, right up until you tried to land on it. "What makes it so dangerous?" he asked. "Where do I start, sir?" "The gravity is strong enough to pin most species to the ground. The weather systems are completely chaotic. They have storms that can level cities. The planet is covered in predators that evolved to hunt each other. But the strangest part is the humans themselves." "Explain." "They didn't just survive this world, sir. They conquered it. Every other dangerous species is either extinct, contained, or serves them. They turn their entire planet into a resource for their own use, and then—" The officer paused, looking confused. "Then what?" "Then they started fighting each other, sir. For thousands of years. They've had hundreds of wars, developed thousands of different ways to fight. They study warfare like we study honor. They even fought wars just to practice fighting better." Wars. Zethrak was quiet for a moment. Most species, when they conquered their homeworld, focused on exploration or science or art. Fighting each other after becoming the dominant species seemed wasteful, but maybe it explained how they survived. A Class 7 death world. "Show me their military capabilities." The screen filled with images of human weapons and vehicles. Zethrak expected primitive spears and maybe some basic energy weapons. Instead, he saw sleek warships, advanced armor, and weapons that looked surprisingly sophisticated. Not Korthek level, certainly, but far more advanced than they should be for such a young species. "They have orbital defense platforms around their planet," the officer continued. "Military bases on their moon. Weapon satellites throughout their solar system. Sir, they've militarized their entire home system like they're expecting an invasion. Good. Zethric grinned, showing teeth like broken glass. I hate it when they don't put up a fight. He walked to the window overlooking the ship's hangar bays. Thousands of Korthek warriors were preparing for the coming campaign. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met their match. Their armor gleamed, their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Each one was a killing machine trained from birth to destroy enemies of the hegemony. Gather the War Council, he ordered. We have a new world to add to our collection. An hour later, the Bone Render's main conference room filled with the hegemony's most experienced generals. These were Korthek who had conquered entire star systems, who had broken species that had ruled space for millions of years. Their combined experience represented the destruction of countless civilizations. General Krax, scarred from 100 battles, was the first to speak. Another Deathworld species? How refreshing. Most of the galaxy has gone soft, living on easy worlds with gentle climates. It will be good to fight something with actual claws for once. Don't underestimate them, warned General Vorth, the oldest Korthek in the room. Deathworld species can be predictable, Krax snorted. Unpredictable? We've conquered 47 worlds, including 3 other Deathworld species. The pattern is always the same. They think their harsh homeworld made them strong? We show them what real strength looks like. True, Vorth nodded. But look at this. He activated his personal display, showing human population numbers. 12 billion of them. All on one planet. Most Deathworld species keep small populations because their world naturally limits them, but these humans, they've overridden their world's natural population controls? The room fell quiet. 12 billion was more than the total population of the Korthek hegemony spread across 50 worlds. Numbers mean nothing without strength, Krax insisted. 1 billion prey animals are still just prey. Zethric studied the data. Something felt different about this species, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Every other conquest had followed the same pattern. The Korthak would arrive, demonstrate their superior technology and strength, and the locals would either surrender immediately or fight a brief, hopeless resistance before being crushed. What's our standard approach? He asked. We send a small fleet first, General Vorth explained. Make contact, demand surrender, and demonstrate our power if they refuse. Most species submit immediately once they see what we're capable of. The few that don't usually break after we destroy a few of their cities? And if they still resist? Then we bring in the main fleet and end it quickly. No species has lasted more than 6 months against a full Korthek assault. Zethric nodded. It was a proven strategy that had worked for 3 millennia. There was no reason to think these humans would be any different, Deathworld or not. Very well. Prepare a first contact fleet. 3 heavy cruisers should be enough to make our point. If they're smart, they'll surrender immediately. If not, he shrugged. We'll give them a demonstration they won't forget. As the meeting dispersed, Zethric remained behind, staring at the image of Earth floating in space. Something about the planet nagged at him, but he dismissed the feeling. The Korthek were the apex predators of the galaxy. No species had ever proven their equal, and no species ever would. After all, what could possibly go wrong? 3 weeks later, the Korthek First Contact Fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's moon. Commander Zethric had sent his most experienced diplomat, Ambassador Threk, along with 3 of their newest heavy cruisers. The ships were sleek, predators designed to intimidate. Their hulls painted in the deep red that meant death in Korthek culture. Threk expected to find a few primitive orbital stations and maybe some basic defense satellites. Instead, his sensors lit up like a festival display. The entire solar system was crawling with human activity. What in the void is all this? Threk muttered, staring at his tactical display. His aide, a young Korthek named Vex, checked the readings. Twice. Sir, I'm detecting over 3,000 artificial objects in this system. Military platforms, mining stations, research facilities, defense grids. They've turned their entire solar system into a fortress. Threk's mandibles clicked in. Annoyance. Most species barely managed to put a few satellites around their homeworld before the Korthik found them. These humans had spread throughout their star system like they owned the place. Contact their leadership, he ordered. Time to introduce them to reality. On Earth, Admiral Rebecca Vasquez was having her morning coffee when the alerts started screaming across every military network on the planet. She'd been expecting this day for 50 years, ever since humanity's first deep space probes had detected signs of alien civilization. Unlike the politicians who hoped for peaceful contact, military leaders like Vasquez had prepared for the worst. We have 3 large vessels of unknown design holding position near Luna, reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Put it through, Vasquez said, setting down her coffee. She'd been Earth's top strategic commander for 15 years, chosen specifically because she understood that humans' greatest strength wasn't their technology or their courage. It was their ability to learn and adapt faster than anyone expected. The main screen flickered to life, showing a creature that looked like a cross between a tank and a nightmare. Ambassador Threk's scarred face filled the display, his yellow eyes glowing with predatory confidence. I am Ambassador Threk of the Korthik Hegemony, the creature began, his voice deep and menacing even through the universal translator. You will surrender your world immediately and submit to hegemony rule. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. Vasquez almost smiled. After decades of preparing for this moment, the aliens had opened with exactly the approach. Human war planners had predicted overwhelming intimidation backed by superior technology. It was textbook predator behavior. This is Admiral Vasquez of Earth Defense Command, she replied calmly. Thanks for the introduction, but we'll have to decline your generous offer. Threk's expression shifted to confusion. Most species either surrendered immediately or begged for mercy. This human seemed almost amused. Perhaps you don't understand, Threk continued. The Korthik hegemony has conquered 47 worlds. We have never been defeated. Your primitive technology cannot stand against our might. You know what's funny? Vasquez leaned back in her chair. We've been practicing warfare on each other for thousands of years. You picked the wrong death world. Before Threk could respond, his tactical officer shouted a warning. Sir, multiple contacts closing fast. The space around the Korthik ship suddenly filled with human vessels appearing from seemingly nowhere. They hadn't used hyperspace drives. They'd been hiding behind asteroids, inside the shadows of planets, even disguised as space debris. In seconds, the 3 Korthik ships found themselves surrounded by dozens of human fighters and frigates. Threk stared at the display in disbelief. How did they hide so many ships? His aide was frantically scanning the human vessels. Sir, their stealth technology is, I don't understand it. It's like they made their ships invisible to our sensors. What Threk didn't know was that humans had developed their hiding techniques through centuries of submarine warfare, aerial combat, and guerrilla tactics. They'd learned to use their environment as a weapon to turn their enemies' expectations against them. This is your only warning, Vasquez's voice came through the come again. Leave our system now, or we'll show you what happens when you threaten a species that conquered its own planet. Threk laughed, the sound like grinding metal. You think a few dozen primitive ships can threaten us? Weapons online. Target there. Largest vessel? The Korthik heavy cruiser opened fire with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Plasma beams lanced out toward the human flagship. Energy that should have vaporized any primitive vessel, instead the human ship simply wasn't there anymore. It had moved with impossible speed, spinning away from the attack while launching a spread of missiles that seemed to think for themselves. The projectiles twisted and turned through space, avoiding the Korthik point defense systems like they were alive. Impossible, Threk breathed. No ship that small should be able to move like that. But humans had learned to fight in 3 dimensions long before they reached space. Their pilots trained in atmospheres where a single mistake meant death, where split-second reactions were the difference between survival and becoming a crater. They flew their ships like extensions of their own bodies, using instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution on a world that tried to kill them daily. The missiles struck the Korthik cruiser's shields, but instead of exploding, they did something unexpected. They adapted. The warheads shifted their attack patterns in real time, finding weak points in the shield matrix that should have been impossible to detect. "Shield strength down to 70%, reported the tactical officer, his voice shaking. "Sir, those missiles are learning our defensive patterns." Threk felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: uncertainty. The Korthak had always won through superior firepower and intimidation. But these humans were fighting like they'd studied Korthak tactics and developed specific counters, which, of course, they had. Human intelligence services had been analyzing alien technology for decades, preparing for exactly this scenario. They'd run thousands of simulations, developed hundreds of strategies, and built their entire military doctrine around one simple principle: never fight fair when lives are on the line. The human fighters moved in coordinated swarms, using pack tactics that reminded Threk uncomfortably of the apex predators on his own homeworld. But these weren't mindless beasts. They communicated constantly, shared targeting data, and covered each other's weaknesses with precision that spoke of intensive training. "Sir, they're jamming our communications," his aide reported. "Somehow, they're interfering with our quantum entanglement arrays?" "That's impossible. Quantum entanglement can't be jammed." "Tell that to them, sir. They're doing it anyway." What the Korthak didn't understand was that humans had approached warfare differently than any other species. While most civilizations developed overwhelming force, humans had developed overwhelming adaptability. They didn't just build weapons. They built systems that could change and evolve during battle. The fight around Jupiter's moons lasted 6 hours. For the first time in Korthak history, their ships were outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and outfought by supposedly primitive opponents. The human vessels danced around the heavier Korthak ships like fighters around a tank, using speed and coordination to overcome raw power. When Korthak boarding shuttles managed to breach one of the human vessels, the warriors inside discovered something that shook them to their core. The humans didn't just fight back. They fought with a creativity and viciousness that the honor-bound Korthak had never encountered. Human soldiers used their ship's own systems against the boarders, flooding compartments with radiation, venting atmosphere at strategic moments, and even using the artificial gravity as a weapon. They fought with improvised weapons, explosive traps, and tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. One Korthak warrior, veteran of a dozen boarding actions, found himself trapped in a human corridor that had been turned into a maze of obstacles and ambush points. The humans didn't fight with honor. They fought to win. They used every dirty trick, every unfair advantage, every lesson learned from thousands of years of fighting each other. "These aren't warriors," he reported back to his ship before his come went dead. "They're something else entirely." By the end of the engagement, all 3 Korthak ships were heavily damaged. Threk found himself staring at tactical displays that made no sense. His superior technology, his overwhelming firepower, his centuries of experience, none of it had prepared him for an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. "Sir," his aide whispered, "perhaps we should withdraw and report back to command." Threk's pride warred with his survival instincts. The Korthak had never retreated from any battle. But they'd also never faced an enemy like this. Admiral Vasquez's voice crackled over the cum one last time. "Ambassador Threk, you're welcome to stay and continue this conversation. But I should warn you, we've got about 200 more ships on their way here. And they're all piloted by humans who've been itching for a real fight." For the first time in his life, Ambassador Threk of the Korthak hegemony gave the order to retreat, as his damaged ships limped toward the edge. Back on the Bone Render, Commander Zethrek stared at Ambassador Threk's damaged ship as it limped into the docking bay. The proud vessel that had left just days ago now looked like it had been chewed up by a space monster. Scorch marks covered the hull. Entire sections were missing, and the communications array sparked with damaged circuits, Threk himself looked even worse. The ambassador's usually pristine armor was cracked and dented. One of his mandibles had been broken, and his yellow eyes held something Zethric had never seen in a Korthek before: doubt. "Report," Zethric commanded, though he dreaded the answer. "Sir, we underestimated them," Threk began, his voice barely above a whisper. "These humans, they don't fight like any species we've encountered." "Explain." Threk activated a holographic display showing the battle. They turned space itself into a weapon. They used asteroids for cover, gravity fields for acceleration, even the radiation from their star to mask their approach. It was like fighting ghosts who could hit back. Zethric watched the playback with growing alarm. He'd expected to see a typical skirmish, Korthak ships overwhelming primitive defenses through superior firepower. Instead, he saw something that looked more like a dance than a battle. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed almost artistic, weaving between Korthak weapons fire while their own attacks struck with surgical precision. "How many ships did they have?" he asked. "Initially, maybe 40. But sir, they fought like 400. Every ship covered 2 others, every attack served 3 purposes, every retreat was actually an advance in disguise." This was troubling. Korthak tactics relied on straightforward, overwhelming force. They'd never needed to develop complex strategies because raw power had always been enough. But these humans seemed to treat warfare like some kind of sophisticated art form. What about their technology? "Inferior to ours in raw power, but ... Threk hesitated. "Sir, they've somehow made inferior technology work better than our superior technology. Their missiles adapted during flight. Their ships moved in ways that should have been impossible. And their soldiers—" "What about their soldiers? They don't fight with honor, sir. They fight to win. They used every dirty trick imaginable. They turned their own ship systems into weapons against us. They fought like they'd studied our tactics for decades and developed specific counters for everything we do." Zethric felt a chill run down his armored spine. "Show me their military records." The intelligence division had been working around the clock to decode human data transmissions. What they'd found was disturbing. The main screen filled with images from human history, thousands of conflicts, millions of battles, countless innovations in the art of warfare. "They've been fighting each other for their entire recorded history," the intelligence officer reported. "Not just occasional wars, sir. Constant, continuous, evolving warfare. They study battle like we study hunting. They've developed hundreds of different fighting styles, thousands of tactics, and they never stop improving." Zethric studied the images. Humans fighting with primitive spears, then with gunpowder weapons, then with machines, then with aircraft, then in space. Each era showed new innovations, new ways to gain advantages over their enemies. It was like watching a species that had turned evolution itself into a weapon. "Look at this," the officer continued, highlighting a section of data. "They have something called military academies where they teach their young how to fight. Nah, just physical combat, but strategy, logistics, psychology of warfare. They've turned warfare into a science." "All species develop military technology," Zethric protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, sir, but look at the pattern. Most species develop weapons to defend against external threats or to conquer others. Humans developed weapons to fight each other. They've spent thousands of years trying to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outfight opponents who know all their tricks because they're the same species." The implications hit Zethric like a meteor. The Korthak had become the galaxy's apex predators by being stronger and more ruthless than everyone else. But they'd never faced an opponent who had spent millennia perfecting the art of fighting opponents who were equally strong and equally ruthless. "What about their industrial capacity?" he asked, hoping for better news. The answer was even more disturbing. "Sir, they've turned their entire planet into a war machine. Not just their military, their civilian population, their factories, their research institutions. They have something they call total war doctrine, where their entire species contributes to the war effort. Images flashed on the screen showing human factories retooling overnight to produce military equipment, civilian populations working around the clock to support their military, and research facilities developing new weapons technologies at unprecedented speed. They've done this before, the officer explained. Multiple times in their history. When threatened, their entire species transforms into a single organism dedicated to warfare. They call it wartime economy, and they're terrifyingly efficient at it. Zethric thought about the Korthic's own industrial base. They relied on tribute from conquered worlds, taking resources and finished goods from species who had no choice but to provide them. But the humans had learned to maximize every resource, to turn every citizen into a contributor to their war machine. "Sir, there's more," the intelligence officer continued nervously. "We intercepted some of their communications. They're not panicking about our arrival. They single quotes excited. Excited? Yes, sir. They're treating this like some kind of ultimate test. Their military leaders are calling it the chance to prove themselves against a galactic superpower. Their soldiers are volunteering for the most dangerous assignments. Their scientists are working overtime to develop new weapons. It's like they've been waiting their whole lives for this fight." This was completely outside Korthic experience. Every other species had either surrendered immediately or fought desperately for survival. The humans seemed to be approaching the war like it was some kind of championship tournament they'd been training for. "What about their weaknesses?" Zethrak asked desperately. The intelligence officer looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we're having trouble finding any. They've spent their entire evolution on a death world, so they're already adapted to hostile environments. They've been fighting each other for millennia, so they're immune to most psychological warfare. They've built their entire civilization around the concept of constant improvement, so they adapt to new threats faster than we can deploy them." Zethruck studied the tactical reports from the first engagement. Every advantage the Korthic had deployed, the humans had countered. Every weapon that had broken other species, the humans had adapted to. Every strategy that had won them an empire, the humans had turned against them. "Sir," his aide interrupted quietly, "perhaps we should reconsider our approach." "Maybe negotiate rather than conquer?" Zethrak's pride flared. The Korthak didn't negotiate. They conquered. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, and no primitive Deathworld species was going to change that. As he stared at the tactical displays, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything he believed about strength and superiority was about to be challenged in ways he'd never imagined. "Double our fleet strength," he ordered finally. "If these humans want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget." What Zethrak didn't know was that Admiral Vasquez and her staff were having almost the exact same conversation on Earth, except with one crucial difference. While the Korthak were trying to understand why their usual tactics weren't working, the humans were already 3 steps ahead, developing new strategies specifically designed to exploit Korthak weaknesses they'd identified in the first battle. The Korthak thought they were escalating the conflict. The humans knew they were just getting started. And somewhere in the depths of space, both sides began preparing for a war that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be an apex predator. The learning curve was about to become very steep, and the Korthak were on the wrong side of it. 6 months into the war, the galaxy had never seen anything like it. Commander Zethric stood in his command center surrounded by holographic displays showing battle reports from across 3 star systems. Each report told the same impossible story. The Korthak hegemony, conquerors of 47 worlds, were losing, not just losing battles. They were being outmaneuvered, and out-evolved by a species that had supposedly just learned to travel between stars. "Status report," Zethric demanded, though he no longer looked forward to the answers. General Krax, his armor now scarred from personal combat, stepped forward. "Sir, we've lost 12 ships in the Proxima system. The humans have somehow weaponized the star itself. They're using controlled solar flares to disrupt our shields while their ships attack from the corona where our sensors can't track them." Zethric's mandibles clicked in frustration. Explain how a primitive species can control a star. They can't control it, sir, but they can predict it. Their scientists have mapped stellar activity patterns going back thousands of years. They know exactly when and where solar flares will occur, and they've built their entire battle strategy around that knowledge. This was becoming a pattern. Humans didn't overpower Korthic technology. They understood it better than the Korthic did. They studied everything, analyzed every weakness, and then developed tactics that turned Korthic strengths into vulnerabilities. What about the Titan system? Zethric asked. General Vorth activated his display, showing a tactical nightmare. Gone. Sir, the humans didn't just defeat our garrison, they captured it. All 3 dreadnoughts, their crews, and the orbital facilities? But that's not the worst part. What could be worse? They didn't just capture our ships, sir, they've improved them. Intelligence reports show human vessels using hybrid technology that combines our weapons with their tactical systems. They're making our own technology work better than we can. Zethric felt something he'd never experienced before, genuine fear. The Korthak had always won through superior technology and overwhelming force. But the humans were taking that technology and somehow making it better. It was like watching prey animals learn to hunt better than the predators. How is that possible? They approach technology differently than we do, sir. We build weapons to impose our will through strength. They build systems to solve problems. When they captured our ships, they immediately started asking, how can we make this better? Instead of how can we use this to intimidate others? The intelligence officer stepped forward with a data pad. Sir, we've decoded more of their military communications. They're sharing technical innovations across their entire fleet in real time. When one human ship discovers a new tactic, every other human ship knows about it within hours. This violated everything the Korthic understood about warfare. Military secrets were supposed to be guarded jealously. Technological advantages were supposed to provide lasting superiority. But the humans treated knowledge like a weapon that got stronger when shared rather than weaker. Show me the latest battle recordings. Zethric ordered, the main screen filled with footage from the Battle of Proxima Centauri. Zethric watched as human ships performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. They moved in perfect coordination, like schools of fish or flocks of birds, but with a precision that spoke of intense training and communication. Notice how they fight, General Vorth pointed out. They don't compete with each other for glory or honor. Every ship sacrifices itself if necessary to give others a tactical advantage. They treat their individual lives as less important than their collective victory. This was perhaps the most alien thing about the humans. Korthak culture was built around individual strength and personal honor. Warriors competed for glory, and the strongest led. But human warriors seemed to operate like cells in a single organism, each one willing to die if it meant the whole could. Survive and win. Sir, we have reports of something even more disturbing, the intelligence officer continued. The humans are using biological weapons, but not in the way we understand them. Explain. They've analyzed our physiology and developed targeted viruses that don't kill us, but make us sick enough to be ineffective in combat. They're using our own biological systems against us, and Sir ... They've somehow made these weapons completely harmless to themselves and their allies. Zethric stared at the report. Biological warfare was nothing new. The Korthak had used it themselves. But creating species-specific weapons that could target enemies while leaving allies untouched? That required a level of biological understanding that most galactic civilizations took millions of years to develop. How advanced is their science? That's the terrifying part, sir. It's not more advanced than ours, it's more creative. They don't just study how things work, they study how things could work differently. They see possibilities we never considered. The screen switched to show human research facilities. Unlike Korthak laboratories that focused on improving existing weapons, human scientists seemed to be inventing entirely new ways to fight. They combined technologies in unexpected ways, used peaceful equipment for military purposes, and developed weapons that thought for themselves. "Sir, we need to discuss the captured prisoners," General Crack said quietly. "What about them?" "They won't break, sir. We've used every interrogation technique in our arsenal." "Physical pain doesn't work? They seem to treat it as just another challenge to overcome." "Psychological warfare doesn't work. They've been competing with each other for so long that they're immune to most mental pressure. And threats don't work because they genuinely don't seem to fear death." Zethric had interrogated prisoners from dozens of species. There was always a breaking point, always some fear or weakness that could be exploited. But human prisoners seemed to treat capture like just another form of combat, constantly looking for ways to escape, gather intelligence, or even recruit their captors. One of them actually started explaining to our guards why their tactics were ineffective, Krax continued. He gave them a lecture on human military history and suggested improvements to our detention procedures. Our own guards were taking notes. "And his suggestions worked, sir? Our detention facilities are now more secure because a human prisoner helped us improve them. But that means he learned about our security systems while helping us upgrade them." Zethric realized he was looking at a species that turned everything into a learning opportunity. Even capture and imprisonment became chances to gather intelligence and improve their understanding of Korthic capabilities. "What about our ancient weapons?" he asked desperately. "The planet crackers, the stellar torpedoes, the weapons we used to break the Threnody Empire?" General Vorth looked uncomfortable. "We deployed stellar torpedoes against their colony in the Alpha Centauri system, sir, and they intercepted them. Not destroyed them, sir, intercepted. They somehow captured weapons designed to destroy stars and reverse-engineered them. Their scientists are now building improved versions." The room fell silent. Stellar torpedoes were supposed to be the ultimate weapon, capable of destabilizing suns and destroying entire solar systems. The idea that anyone could capture and improve them was beyond Korthic comprehension. "Sir," his aide said quietly, "maybe we should consider that we might not win this war." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Korthak had never lost a war. They had never even considered the possibility of losing a war. Their entire identity was built around being the galaxy's ultimate predators. But as Zethrak stared at the tactical displays showing human ships advancing through Korthic space, using improved Korthak weapons and tactics that no Korthak had ever imagined, he began to wonder if they had encountered something that transcended the usual predator-prey relationship. The humans weren't just beating the Korthak. They were evolving faster than the Korthak could adapt, learning from every encounter, and treating the entire war like a massive training exercise that was making them stronger with each battle. "Recall all fleets to the core systems," Zethruck ordered finally. "If these humans want to see what happens when they threaten our homeworld, we'll show them what 3,000 years of conquest looks like." But deep down, he was beginning to suspect that the humans already knew exactly what they were walking into. And somehow they had a plan for that too. 1 year after first contact, something unprecedented was happening in the galaxy. For the first time in 3,000 years, an enemy fleet was approaching the Korthak home system, not fleeing toward it for protection, but attacking it with the confidence of predators who had already won. Commander Zethric stood on the bridge of the Bone Render, watching long-range sensors track the approaching human armada. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. The human fleet moved with the precision of a single organism, ships flowing through space in formations that seemed almost alive. "Fleet composition report," he ordered, his voice hoarse from months of stress. "Sir, we're detecting approximately 800 human vessels," his tactical officer reported. "But Sir, half of them are using our own ship designs. Improved versions of our dreadnoughts, our carriers, our siege platforms. They've somehow made our technology work better than we ever did." Zethric's mandibles clicked in bitter irony. The humans had done more than capture Korthic ships. They had perfected them. Human engineers had taken 3,000 years of Korthic military development and improved it in less than 12 months. What about our defenses? All orbital platforms are online, sir. Every ship in the hegemony has been recalled to defend the homeworld. We have over 2,000 vessels, plus the planetary defense grid that has never been breached. On paper, the Korthik still had overwhelming numerical superiority. Their homeworld was protected by weapons that could vaporize planets, shields that could deflect stellar bombardment, and automated defense systems that had been perfected through millennia of conquest, but Zethrak had learned not to trust numbers. When fighting humans, Admiral Vasquez stood on the bridge of her flagship. The newly commissioned used Defiance, watching Vexstar grow larger on the main screen. The Korthak homeworld looked exactly like Earth's intelligence services had predicted, a scarred, radiation-blasted nightmare that had forged its inhabitants into living weapons. Final approach vectors confirmed, her tactical officer reported. All fleet elements are in position. Remember? Vasquez addressed her crew. We're not here to destroy them. We're here to teach them that strength without wisdom is just another form of weakness. The human fleet split into dozens of smaller formations, each one moving with purpose that seemed random to Korthik observers, but followed patterns developed through centuries of naval warfare. They didn't approach like a traditional invasion. They moved like hunters who had studied their prey for generations. The first surprise came when human ships began broadcasting on Korthik communication frequencies, not threats or demands, but something much more disturbing. They were broadcasting detailed analyses of Korthik military doctrine, pointing out weaknesses and suggesting improvements. Sir, the Korthik communications officer reported in confusion, they're giving us tactical advice. What kind of advice? They're explaining why our defensive formations have gaps, how our weapon placement could be optimized, and, sir, they're offering to teach us better ways to fight. This was psychological warfare on a level the Korthak had never encountered. Instead of trying to intimidate or demoralize their enemies, the humans were demonstrating their intellectual superiority by casually critiquing Korthik military strategy in real time. The battle began when human ships started what looked like suicide runs toward the most heavily defended orbital platforms. Korthik weapons opened fire, filling space with enough destructive energy to glass a continent. But the human ships moved through the barrage like they could see the future, dodging weapons fire with impossible precision. How are they doing that? Zethrak demanded. Sir, they're not just predicting our firing patterns, they're controlling them. They've hacked our targeting computers and are making us shoot where they want us to shoot. The humans had done something that shouldn't have been possible. They had turned the Korthak's own weapons into allies, creating safe quarters through the defensive fire by manipulating the automated systems that controlled the orbital platforms. But the real shock came when human ground forces landed on Vexstar itself. The Korthik homeworld was supposed to be uninhabitable to alien species. The radiation should have killed them instantly. The gravity should have crushed their fragile bones. The toxic atmosphere should have dissolved their primitive lungs. Instead, human soldiers walked across the surface in environmental suits that seemed to treat the deadly conditions as minor inconveniences. They moved with the easy confidence of a species that had conquered a world even more dangerous than Vexstar. Sir, the human ground forces are using our own environment against us, General Krax reported from the surface. They've somehow weaponized our radiation storms. They're using controlled atmospheric pressure waves to bring down our defensive structures. They're fighting like they own this planet. What the Korthak didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this battle for their entire evolutionary history. Every natural disaster on Earth, every environmental challenge, every hostile condition had been training for this moment. Humans didn't just adapt to harsh environments. They learned to use them as weapons. The siege of the Korthik capital became the stuff of legends. Human engineers had studied Korthik architecture and found ways to use the planet's own geological systems against the defenders. They triggered controlled earthquakes, redirected lava flows, and even used the planet's magnetic field to disrupt Korthak. electronics, but the most devastating weapon the humans deployed wasn't technological, it was psychological. They had studied Korthic culture so thoroughly that they understood it better than the Korthic themselves. They knew exactly how to undermine the honor-based system that held Korthic society together. "Sir, we're receiving reports of Korthic units surrendering," General Krax reported, his voice filled with shame. "Not because they're defeated, but because they want to learn from the humans." "Explain." "The humans aren't just beating us, sir. They're teaching us. Every battle, they show us new ways to fight, new strategies to consider, new technologies to develop. Some of our warriors are laying down their weapons because they want to study under human military instructors." This was the final humiliation. The Korthak were surrendering not out of fear, but out of respect for superior knowledge. For a culture that valued strength above all else, encountering a species that was demonstrably better at warfare was like meeting gods. As Korthak cities fell one by one, Zethrak found himself making a choice he had never imagined possible. He could fight to the death, preserving Korthic honor but ensuring the extinction of his species. Or he could do something no Korthic leader had ever done: admit defeat and ask for mercy. The final negotiation took place aboard the UES Defiance, orbiting the broken remains of the Korthak capital. Zethrak, stripped of his armor and weapons, stood before Admiral Vasquez with the weight of 3,000 years of conquest on his shoulders. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why fight so hard? Why not just destroy us and take our territory?" Vasquez leaned back in her chair, studying the alien commander who had learned the hardest lesson in the galaxy. "Because we didn't come here to conquer you. We came here to teach you something important." "What lesson?" "That real strength isn't about dominating the weak. It's about constantly challenging yourself against the strongest opponents you can find. You thought surviving on a death world made you apex predators. But we didn't just survive our death world, we conquered it so completely that we had to start fighting each other to stay sharp." The implications hit Zethrak like a physical blow. The humans hadn't become the galaxy's ultimate warriors by conquering other species. They had become ultimate warriors by spending millennia trying to defeat the most dangerous opponents in the universe themselves. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you have a choice," Vasquez replied. "You can cling to the old ways and watch your species stagnate and eventually fall to someone else. Or you can join us in creating something new, a galaxy where strength is measured by wisdom, where power is used to protect rather than dominate, and where the strongest species are those who never stop learning and growing." The war ended not with the humans conquering the Korthak, but with the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history: an alliance between species, based on mutual respect for each other's capabilities rather than dominance by the strongest. The galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in millions of years, there was a new apex predator in the stars. Not a species that had grown strong by crushing the weak, but one that had grown wise by constantly testing themselves against the strongest challenges they could find. And the most terrifying part for any remaining hostile civilizations was that the humans were still learning, still growing, still looking for stronger opponents to test themselves against. They had proven that the ultimate predator wasn't the one who feared nothing, but the one who feared stagnation more than death. The age of simple conquest was over. The age of earned strength had begun.